Evening to you. I can do that because I'm half Irish. Right, welcome everyone to Community Camp for Palestine and this very, very special evening with Stephen Kapos. Now, I have to say immediately, I hear different pronunciations of your surname. Is it Kapos or Kapos?
It's Kapos.
Oh, there you go. Kapos.
Oh, Kapos.
Kapos.
Yeah.
Kapos, there you go. Stephen Kapos. It's really a huge honour to welcome you to our camp this evening. Many of us, if not all of us, will have seen Stephen at the national protests against Israel's genocide over the last 16, 17 months, and also at many other events too. I think the format for the evening is going to be quite conversational, so I have a number of questions that I would like to ask you, and then obviously we will open it up for a Q&A to the audience. All right. So firstly, I understand, I think it would be helpful to hear a little bit about your childhood, your history. I understand you were a child born and spent your childhood in Budapest during World War II when Germany invaded in 1944. I think it would be helpful to set the context by hearing a little bit from you about what it was like to live as a Jewish family in Hungary at this time, and how Germany's invasion, very late in the war, 1944, changed things for you and your family and the Jewish community more broadly. Yeah, if you could say a little bit about that.
Sure. Hello, first of all, apologies for being late. My solicitors meeting overran a bit. And I had a solicitors meeting because I have a polite invitation from the police to come and have a formal interview, which will be on Friday. I can't say much about it, but just that it will be on Friday, 21st, this coming Friday, and we will take it from there. Okay. A little bit about the childhood and the situation of Jews in Hungary. It's difficult to know how far to go back, but say that during the interwar years, there was always a latent anti-Semitism, but not pronounced enough to actually prevent Jews becoming professionals and have reasonably successful professional lives. Going back in history, during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Austrians realized that in a transformation from a feudalist society to a successful capitalist society, the Jewish population was going to be very helpful because of their fairly high general education and energy that they could bring to the transformation. So rather than making things difficult for the Jewish population, the Habsburgs and Austria-Hungary upper class kind of fostered assimilation rather than anything else. There was a move for obviously Jewish named people to change to Hungarian-sounding names as an aid to as smooth assimilation as possible. And this is when my family took up the name that I have. This is interesting because this is the very opposite of Zionism. The Zionist movement in Hungary was regarded as a freakish extreme. Most educated Hungarian Jews were non-observant, secular, and so was my family. But as I said, there was all the same a latent anti-Semitism, and there was always a kind of right-wing minority movement threatening to become more dominant, and they did in the end, towards the end of the war. Hungary later prided itself on being the first country to bring in racist legislation. This was the numerous clauses where they wanted to limit the number of Jews entering various professions. They didn't want over-representation, as they called it. And my father, who was training as a doctor, had to do 1 year in Prague as a result, because the number of Jews allowed in Hungarian medical schools was exceeded already. So he had a year in Prague. He said it was the best year of his training. We liked the Czechs very much, and there was a German language university where he spent a year studying, and then he could come back next year and finally qualified as a doctor in a rather provincial, not Budapest, university in the southern town of Pécs, which is close to the borders of now Croatia. At that time, Croatia was, after the First World War, Croatia was cut off, so to speak, from the traditional Hungarian territories, as was the north, and which became Slovakia, and as was a bit of Ukraine, which is still now part of Ukraine, and as was Transylvania, which is a huge area, which went over to Romania. Part of my family on my mother's side actually comes from Transylvania, and they were the ones that suffered most in the Holocaust. I will come to that later. So anyway, in between the war years, training and advancement of Jewish people who were interested and keen to go into higher education with difficulty, but despite the numerous clauses, could do it. So my father became a doctor, and then he went on to train as a psychoanalyst. In fact, by the time the Holocaust reached Hungary, he was a trained psychoanalyst. He started off as a GP in a couple of small places close to Budapest, but at that time definitely counted as in the sticks. But now Budapest extended and absorbed at least one of those two places into a suburb. Anyway, come to 1944. Hungary was an ally of Germany and took part in the invasion of the Soviet Union in 41, I think it was. And the regent, who was a autocratic right-wing ruler, very pro-German, had a deal with Hitler whereby Hungary was joining the attacking forces, and in return for which Hitler was to return not all, but a big chunk of the territories that were given over to surrounding countries after the Trianon peace treaty from following World War I. This was not a good deal. It was a very short-term deal. But nonetheless, Transylvania, not all of it, but a big part of Transylvania was returned from Romania to Hungarian rules. And this affected a branch of my family who were farming in Transylvania. In fact, it was more than a farm, it was a small estate. They were quite well off. And when the Hungarians arrived into the reclaimed Transylvania, they were immediately endangered. They were thrown out of their homes for a start. And later, deportations were kind of in the offing. And just before it happened, that branch of my family was approached by some of their Romanian workers who said, look, you are in really serious danger under the renewed Hungarian rule. We are not that far from the Romanian border, and Romania is much more, what shall I say, less under the thumb of the German rule, and they were not as cruelly treating the Jewish population. We could take you over into Romania by illegal routes we know, by horse and cart. Just say yes. But because a member of the family was seriously ill, they judged it that such a journey with bumpy roads on horse and cart was not on, and they turned this down. Sadly, all of them got deported to Auschwitz, and only one or two came back. And this has, in a way, given me a parallel with fates in Gaza and the Palestinians. The difficulty of following safe provisions or orders even from the enemy by leaflets to move on, leave your places, etc., is very difficult in practice when there is a disabled person as member of the family, and it leads to agonizing decisions. I think the Gazans very often experience this. I call this the invisible pain. We all see the atrocities, the massive demolition of buildings and cultural institutions, mosques, and people buried in the rubble, and the shootings, etc. That is very clear to see. But what is not so clear to see is all the invisible pain that goes with that experience. And we did have this already in the Holocaust. Like this example I just said. But there are others too. One aspect of this sort of invisible difficulty and pain is having to make life affirming or life endangering decision in the dark, based on rumors or based on information from the very enemy. And this is an extremely hard thing to do as well. It's another form of torture, mental torture actually. And I will return to this because in my family we had a similar situation and we had to make such decisions. But 1944, by that time, it was quite clear that Germany was losing the war. And the Hungarian pro-German, unprincipled leadership was starting to make indirect approaches to the Western allies to negotiate a separate peace. and leave the German alliance, like Romania did just before, very successfully. And German intelligence was well aware of these moves. And this is when, because of the unreliability of the Hungarian allies, that the German army invaded Hungary. That was March 1944. Immediately, the position of Jews became extremely, greatly endangered, much more so than under the previous right-wing regime. With the German invading forces came Eichmann into Budapest, and Eichmann and his staff, quite a lot of Gestapo and SS bunch, and they set about organizing the deportation of Hungarian Jews from the countryside. They came in March. By midsummer, they have been deporting and transporting to Auschwitz 400,000 Hungarian Jews from the countryside. But they left Budapest for last. That was our luck. I keep saying that surviving the Holocaust is no heroic act, it's always a question of luck. And so this went on for most of the summer. And in fact, in Auschwitz, a separate platform, a new platform was built for the quick reception of the Hungarian Jews, which the vast majority of them immediately sent to the gas chambers. Because Transylvania, by that time counted as Hungarian countryside, this is when my family, I mentioned, fell into these deportations. There was one survivor. There was a cousin, a young cousin. Actually, there were 3 sisters who were all strong young teenagers, and they were set to work in those warehouses in Auschwitz, which sorted clothes, so that the useful warm clothes could be sent to the German front and or the population in Germany. And this particular cousin I knew was working in this warehouse, and one day she was sorting her parents' clothes, and so it was a traumatic experience, as you can imagine. But she did survive and came back. All 3 sisters survived Auschwitz, but on the way back they were caught in a hostel which had a terrible fire one night, and it's not known, but suspected that it was a deliberate arson against the survivors. And of the 3 of them, only one survived, who managed to jump out of a window which was low enough. Later, I met this cousin, by that time with a family in Haifa. She ended up via Romania. She went back to Romania, but from Romania, under the rule of Ceausescu, Romanian Jews could go to Israel. Nowhere else. Israel was practically purchasing Jews. So many $1,000 for each Jew to go to Israel. So that's how they ended up. She and a couple of my aunts and a few others in Israel, Haifa. When I visited them, I stayed with this cousin on one occasion, and I was completely shocked how racist and Zionist she became. somebody who had that experience behind her, I couldn't understand it, and I still can't understand it quite. Partly the continuous propaganda that they were under, the brainwashing, partly the identification with the oppressors as a kind of psychological reaction. It's difficult to untangle, but I was completely shocked by this. And I found the same with my aunts. They all became Zionists. And one particular aunt, who was extremely helpful during the Holocaust in Budapest, was almost heroic in her actions, also became an extreme Zionist. And although she was a convert to Christianity and practiced it still in Haifa, somewhat in secret, so that the neighbors shouldn't know. And despite her kind of Christian beliefs, and they were genuine beliefs, she was perfectly happy to see on the news Palestinian demonstrators being shot at from helicopter gunships. When I was totally aghast watching with her, she turned to me and said, "What's the problem? They are Arabs." So there is this amazing phenomenon. I can't fully explain it. But I was aware of this atmosphere of racism, not only in my family, but generally. It was in the air, as well as militarism. Soldiers everywhere, the whole atmosphere. I didn't like it at all. Although I must say, Haifa itself is very beautiful, and the vegetation is wonderful, but the atmosphere is not. Anyway, going back to the Holocaust in '44. So as I explained, the Nazis came in, and we had to go into some degree of hiding. But before that, I don't know if you heard about the Kastner project. There's a prominent Transylvanian Zionist who came to Hungary, Budapest, at that time, and somehow managed to get the confidence of the Hungarian Jewish leadership. And he was allowed to negotiate with the Nazis on behalf of mostly Transylvanian, but not exclusively Transylvanian Jews. And the deal was that in return for delivering certain goods the Germans wanted, money, jewelry, trucks to be used on the Eastern Front, and textiles for the army, etc. Against the delivery of certain quantity of these goods, they would ensure the freedom, the liberation of about 2,000 Hungarian Jews. Well, 1,600 was originally the number. And Kastner organized transports on that basis. But the agreement was that the route was via Belgium, Bergen-Belsen. So first, this transport would arrive at Belgium, and after a while they would be transferred from that to Switzerland and freed against the delivery of these goods. Apparently the first transport actually worked like this, although it was split in half, and the half was gone to Switzerland straight away, the other half delayed. And my family, who were, as I said, of Transylvanian connections, were signed up to the, well, depends how you look at it, the second or third such transport via Kasna. Now, I was 7-year-old. I didn't know about the ins and outs of all this. But looking back on it, I am absolutely amazed what it must have taken for my father to make the decision to trust the Nazi deal like this and to go into a transport via Belgium and trusted that it would work. And I wanted, that divided the family. Only the men were included at that point. And I wondered how he could make this decision. Well, the answer is that the alternative was even worse. The alternative was labor camps attached to the Hungarian fighting troops on the Eastern Front. But not in uniform, but with a yellow armband marking them out as Jewish labor. And they were bullied and exploited and starved and most often were used for mine clearance. And the survival rate was about 10%. So even a deal with the Nazis, and ultimately not only Eichmann but Himmler himself was involved in this deal, was an amazing decision, I think. I myself was very briefly, in a collecting camp of Kasna. He set up a camp in Budapest called the Columbus Street Camp in the grounds of a large institute for the hard of hearing and the blind. And there were kind of standard barracks, timber barracks erected for the purpose, and we were sleeping on bunk beds, several tiers, with straw mattresses, that kind of stuff. And mostly what I remember is a terrible, scary latrine that they built, which looked extremely dangerous to me to use as a child. And but apart from that, the camp was guarded on the outside by SS soldiers, and the inside Hungarian uniformed police, who were reasonably friendly actually. And the function of the SS guards was to keep people out, not in, because it was meant to be a privileged camp. But there were all kinds of rumors flying about, is this a safe path, is it not? And you could leave the camp. And we did at one point. And that was in October 44. It so happens that my father and my uncles returned to this camp and were eventually transported. But the children were sent up into the Buddha Hills, in an area close to the royal castle, where there were set up these children's homes with false papers and false names, pretending to be refugees from the Eastern Front, from the advancing Russians, or some of us as refugees and some of us as orphans, war orphans, all Gentiles. And I was involved in the initial first couple of such homes, which were also sponsored by the Swiss Red Cross, who had a very brave emissary organizing things, and jointly with the Hungarian Protestant churches, the Calvinists and the Lutherans together. And this more or less worked. sometimes the Hungarian fascist groups, the Arrow Cross, suspected that this was all a fake setup, and tried to raid the place. And then we had access to this Swiss envoy who would arrive in the last minute and keep them away, saying that you can't put a foot over the threshold because that's extraterritorial area for Hungary. It's Switzerland, and you would start an international incident. And generally, that worked. It was a complete bluff. He had nothing to back it up. He had some friendly connections with the Hungarian foreign ministry, where there was one or two sympathetic person who, on a telephone call, confirmed it. Yes, you cannot possibly cross into that.